I'm the administrative assistant for ArcGen. And my current work is in creating video games to teach kids around your age about medicine and ways to like navigate different social situations surrounding medical misuse as well. So hopefully one day this video game can be appear in your classroom, such as like health or even like physical education, because we think that learning is much more fun when you're doing it in a fun way. So I will pass the baton to Kevin.
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. Glad to be here. My name is Kevin. I'm an undergraduate right now, and I write code for a living. So hackathons are, I've done hackathons before. I've only done a few, but we happened to get really lucky when we did our hackathons. And so I think in general, hackathons are an awesome way to exercise not only your technical skills, but also your ability to come up with ideas and to think big about real problems in the world. So super happy to be here. I know that the Appathon just started. So best of luck to all the teams that are happening, that are participating. And I hope that today's event will be useful. Just as like a preview, the event is structured in a very simple manner. Kat's going to talk about a little bit about the Appathon themes, and then I'm going to talk about some general hackathon tips and tricks that I've gathered. And then I'm going to open the floor to you guys. So whatever you want to ask, ranging from like basic questions, basic general questions, all the way to if you have a specific idea that you want me to comment on, or maybe we can wordsmith it or workshop it together in front of the audience. I think that'd be awesome too. Just whatever you want to talk about, I'm here to talk about. And I'm just here to make sure that you guys have a good, are well prepared. So yeah, I'll hand it back to Kat.
Thank you for that, Kevin. Why don't we go to the next slide? So as you may have learned, as it was announced really recently, these are the 2022 Appathon themes, and it's basically centering on what can we do for this world, what are the gaps, and what can we do with an app that can help close those gaps. The examples being quality education, sustainable cities and communities, life below water, life on land, and peace, justice, and strong institutions. And perhaps some of you have some ideas already, but part of this presentation is to also create a conversation to help generate some of those ideas. And as Kevin is going to underscore again and again, it's more important to have the ideas and the empathy for the people who are going to be impacted by your app versus the mechanics, which you have been practicing already, hence why you have signed up for this event as well. So can we go to the next one? Okay, so I'm gonna put more of a spotlight on the visual representation because as we are all here, we hold a certain degree of privilege already to be in this spot and to be in front of a computer and to be in a well AC'd room. Hopefully, it's getting hot. But as you can see in the visual, there are a lot of areas in this world that don't have what we have. And it's important to take perspective of that and use our privilege and experience with technology to make a creation that is going to be accessible to the people in need. And that is based on your vision and idea of what the world really needs. So there's 17 goals on the website for United Union. If you haven't gotten the chance to take a look at the website, I definitely recommend that. And in fact, I think it'll be a good use of time for me to put the link in the Zoom call in case you want to use that as a reference for the remainder of this meeting. So that is the website for the different SDGs, which stands for Sustainable Development Goals. And here are some of the current hackathon project ideas for these SDGs. But we definitely encourage you to have your own original ideas for that. Okay. I think with
awesome.
That, ready for the next slide.
Yeah, so this is kind of where I jump in and talk about some general tips that I have for hackathons. I think Kat really did a good job of contextualizing why we do hackathons, which is again, it's mostly about the ideas. Obviously, it's a great way to test how quick you are and how well versed you are in all the ways to build applications. But what really hackathons are trying to get at is to make you imagine things that people haven't imagined before. So I think that this abstract understanding of what a hackathon is very important. But here I'll give you some practical tips because I know that abstract things don't fly in the real world. So here's your timeline, just as a reminder. And it should be, the first thing that kind of sticks out is that you don't have that much time, right? The submissions are due on the 30th, it's the 19th, you have under 2 weeks to finish your application. So what does that mean for you? One of the fundamental trade-offs that you have to make when you're building projects like these is whether you're going to focus a lot on the idea or focus a lot on the execution, because the execution of a very simple and dumb idea could be very, very complicated. Think about making a to-do list. You can make a very simple to-do list just by, having a field and adding things to the list picker, but you can make this arbitrarily complicated. If you want to execute it well, you should technically sync your to-do list with the cloud. You need to deal with merge conflicts when, for example, a phone that's offline, commits a change to this to-do list, and then a phone that, didn't know that this phone had changed, the to-do list had changed, so then it updated and these two things no longer match. These kinds of race conditions, you should account for those. You need to make sure that people can upload images to your to-do list, that they can add deadlines and alarms and reminders and all like these crazy things come out of this really simple idea of making a to-do list. That's execution. And that's not what appathons or hackathons are about. Hackathons are about the big ideas. Hopefully that gives you a little bit of context. I've put together these 3 what I call hot takes on hackathons, which are things that seem unintuitive when you first think about doing hackathons, but I think are actually fundamental and very important if you want to do well in them. The first one is that your ideas are worth much more than your execution. Again, you have less than 2 weeks to build your app. How complicated is it really going to be? It's going to be hard to do something really well in 2 weeks, no matter how skilled you are. I couldn't do anything that good in 2 weeks. So what you really want to focus on is generating the right ideas. Hackathons, when your judges come look at your projects, obviously execution will be a part of it, but what will really help you stand out from the crowd is if you have an idea that the judge really resonates with. And kind of jumping off of that, your follow-up question might be, well, how do I come up with good ideas, right? And I think there's this really powerful idea or concept called thinking from first principles that helps you be very creative. So I'll give you an example, or first I'll define it very briefly. First principles is basically you have a problem that you're trying to solve. If we just look at one of these problems, for example, there is, let's see, quality education. Ensure inclusive and equitable quality education and promote lifelong learning opportunities for all. So instead of looking at this and thinking, the first thing that you do is you go Google what kinds of quality education things there are. You can certainly Google these things for inspiration. But actually, before you even do that, just think to yourself, what does it mean for education to be high quality? What are the problems that people are facing when it comes to education being bad? Maybe a lot of you have experienced this in your own schools, like the teachers are boring. They don't tell the story, they just tell the facts. Or maybe the teachers can't answer the questions that they want to answer, that you want them to answer because they don't know enough. Or in terms of access, maybe your school doesn't offer certain courses that you want to take. If you just think to your life and you relate these problems to your life and you ask fundamentally what is wrong, this is kind of following the model of thinking from first principles. You identify the problem, you go to the root cause and you ask what is going wrong with this root cause, and then you think of solutions that actually address the root cause. A lot of the times people will think backwards, which is they'll kind of look at a problem and be like, quality education. How can I fit some kind of technological innovation and try to solve this quality education problem? And they don't even think about what's actually causing problems with quality in education. So I think you'll find that if you start looking to your own life and thinking about the problems that you face, or trying to empathize with problems that other people face, it'll be much easier to generate ideas that are not the same as everyone else. If you think about first principles, you take the problem, you break it down, and you really ask yourself, what is going wrong here? And you propose some solutions and then you iterate on them. So that's just like a general framework of thinking that I think is super useful. And then the final thing is that, again, you only have 2 weeks. So what are you going to spend more time on? Presenting things or making things? I would say that you live by the presentation and you die by the presentation. No matter how crazy your idea and your execution is, you could have world-class ideas and world-class execution. If you don't present them well, the judge is not going to buy it. And on the flip side, if you have an idea that's great, an execution that's great, or it's just good, but you present it really, really well, you're going to go much further than you would if you did the opposite. So these are kind of main ideas that I know kind of detract from the main messaging of hackathons, which is, we're going to use our coding and to code, code. Hackathons are very much about coding, but the big ideas you need to take more into consideration than maybe you already have. So these are just my general pieces of advice on hackathons. I think now Kat is going to kind of like go through a compiled list of questions that you guys submitted, which we thought were really good and were really insightful. So Kat's going to go through them, kind of explain what the questions are asking, and then we'll have a discussion about what I think or what Kat thinks the right answer is.
Yeah. So actually, before we enter into the FAQ section, I do want to piggyback off some of the really good points that Kevin pointed out about these big ideas that you have and how it outweighs like the execution. I think another component that's really important to consider is the accessibility portion. And I don't mean like just being accessible to technology, like everyone has like an iPhone or Samsung, but it's more about how usable it is. Because even though it's obvious that there's some big problems in the world, it doesn't necessarily mean that the solution has to be overly complicated. Because like you said, it's only a 2-week time window. So you're not going to be making like a Snapchat or Instagram for that matter. But just it's more important about having an empathetic perspective of the people you're serving. But anyways, let's transition into the FAQ. Next one. So there's like 2 different options for how you navigate Appathon. Are you going to be submitting as an individual or as a team? So I think Kevin, who's very experienced with this, can answer to the pros and cons of these different contexts.
Yeah. So in general, in these hackathons, apparently these these team and individual submissions are judged separately. And so as you might imagine, the team ones, you have higher expectations from the judges, of course, but the flip side is you have more manpower, so you can do more. So it really comes down to, I think, how complicated your idea is. I personally always think that working in a team is great because it's just a lot easier to work on larger things. But if you're kind of the lone wolf type and you think you work better by yourself and you think that your idea is approachable as an individual, then by all means go for it. But I think teamwork is not only very powerful, but it's also a good skill to learn. In terms of strategic advantages and disadvantages, if you have an idea that's very, very simple and you think you can implement it and you think that you can take care of everything, like you are really good at presenting ideas, you're really good at making demo videos, you're really good at coding, you're really good at coming up with these ideas and vetting them, you have good taste, then sure, you can work by yourself. But there is a massive strategic advantage to having people who can do different types of things, so that you're not overwhelmed in these 2 weeks. So, and we might touch on this later, regarding team composition, but so those are just some of the things that you should keep in mind. In summary, individual, you have less expectation for how much you're supposed to do, but you have less manpower, and it's the opposite for team submissions. It's really up to personal choice.
Yeah, so I think the second question, Kevin kind of answers some of the parts of this question already, but it's about how you put a team together. And traditionally, you think of, okay, how do we balance this power? How do we delegate the responsibilities? And what's the ratio between those people who create the ideas and those who make the ideas come to life through an app? Or what skills do you need? Like, can everyone subscribe to these skills, and can everyone like perform these skills sufficiently? So I think Kevin can answer to if this traditional like framework and strategy is consistent with Appathon, or perhaps like some of your own experience in creating a team, because I know that you led the Appathon team before and had great results.
Yeah, cool. So regarding creating a team, I think there are a few things that you want to evaluate. Okay, so there's actually a question. I am not familiar with this. I was told that they're in different pools. Can someone confirm? Oh, okay. Yeah, okay. So then there's a strategic advantage to choosing one or the other. But there are a few axes along which you want to think about creating team. The first one is how well you know your teammates. I think this one is hugely important because the better you know your teammates, the more streamlined communication is going to be, the more comfortable you will be with, having frequent communication, basically. It's very hard to communicate with people that you've just met, especially if you're not in person. So that's something you definitely want to think about. Secondly, you definitely want to have a diverse set of skills. If you're all sort of jacks of all trades or even masters of all trades, then this wouldn't be a problem. But if somebody is better at doing graphic design or is better at filming demo videos, and then another person is better at coding, another person is better at thinking about and vetting ideas, you guys should all come together and you can cover for each other's weaknesses. This is another great thing to do. In general, there's no secret to creating teams. It's a hard thing, and it's things that even adults struggle with when they build companies and when they do research. Fundamentally, you have to have a lot of trust within your team. And I know this sounds vague, but you just have to feel it out. It's much easier to trust people that you're friends with or close friends with. And then it's also easier to trust people when they also have different skills than you, because you trust that you can rely on them when your skills aren't up to par. So those are just some general thoughts on creating teams.
Okay, so we touch on a few of these bullet points on how to create a good idea. And I think using the word good is kind of abstract in itself because good can be very subjective. And again, you are going to be judged on the goodness of your creation. But I think I will take a step forward to answer this a little bit just in general. So I think for ideas in this specific context, it's important to know what can be a good buy-in factor from your audience, because if the audience is not convinced that this is going to be beneficial for them, they're not even going to use the app and open it up to learn how to navigate it and use it in the first place. And another part is acceptable.
Am I the one who's lagging, or is Kat the one that's lagging? Okay, so Kat is lagging. I will cover for her while she lags and figures out her Wi-Fi situation. Yeah, so I totally agree. I think, oh no, she's back. And then she froze again. Okay. I think what Kat mentioned is super important, buy-in factor. Basically, when you present, and I will talk about this a little bit later, but one of the key things you have to keep in mind is you have to be comprehensive. When you're preparing your presentation, you have to sort of like imagine all the different things that that people will question you about, and you need to have good answers for them. One of these things is buy-in, which Kat was talking about. So really making sure that your idea makes sense, not only in your own head, but also when you talk to people, it makes sense. And if you try to put yourselves in the shoes of the people that you're trying to serve, it has to make sense. Kat, did you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I do. I had two other points, and I think oftentimes they're overlooked. So I just want to mention that. So another part about like people you're trying to reach out to with your app is the cultural differences. Like, what do they perceive is acceptable? And part of learning about a culture is like the language. Like, perhaps we have some words in English that they don't have in.
Yeah, looks like Kat's internet is kind of busted. Yeah, so I can continue covering. I think apart from this high level idea creation, I think there's another thing that I wanted to point out, which is that original technical ideas are also really, really good. So you have this problem, you're dreaming of solving this really large problem. Another way to stick out from the crowd is not only to have these really novel solution ideas, but it's also helpful to have interesting technical tidbits, where you kind of like, you encounter a problem and then you use a really technically um, kind of technically original solution to attack it. People just really want to see ingenuity. Um, and in the form of App Inventor, I think technologies that could be useful to capture the imagination of judges could include AI. Make sure to apply it in a context that makes sense, though. But AI is a technology that, when used properly, judges will really like. Um, I think a lot of the things that are taught in these MIT App Inventor courses are similarly cool. Like, for example, using REST APIs to gather data from sources and then displaying the data on apps created with App Inventor. That's also super cool. Cloud databases so that you can sync stuff, you can send messages between people. All that is super interesting. So yeah, it's all these things that Dr. Meng he is sending, and all these things. Yeah, voice APIs, all kinds of APIs, navigations. Really take advantage of these, because other than the fundamental problem that you're trying to solve, these technical ideas are part of the originality. And again, like, the ideas are separate from the implementation. The implementation, you just have to show like a video of it working. It doesn't have to work 100% of the time, because, not going to lie, most hackathon projects are total spaghetti code. But the ideas have to be there, the technical ideas and the solution ideas. We'll come back to Kat if she has more to say once she rejoins and her Wi-Fi is back. But I'm just going to move on. Here's another question that I think is super important, because a lot of people have this question when they are doing hackathons, which is, you have such a limited pool of time. How do I spend it? When do I stop coding and when do I start making a presentation? And this might sound a little bit unsettling at first, but my advice would be to start thinking about the presentation the moment you start coding, because you're not coding to create an application that you can deploy. You're coding to create an application that can show that the idea makes sense. And these are very, very different goals. To show the idea that the idea makes sense, you're going to be filming a demo video. And I'll talk a bit more about specific tips and tricks for the demo video later. But because you need to present this thing in less than 2 weeks, you need to start thinking about what you want in the presentation immediately before you start programming, so that when you program, everything is in the context of, I'm going to take a video and show it. And so the backend doesn't have to work flawlessly. If you take, your finger, you button mash and you spam buttons, it doesn't have to be resilient to this kind of stuff. All you need to do is to make it work for one specific sequence of actions, and to make it show the judges that this idea is going to work and that it's cool. So some of you might be, listening to this and thinking, wow, that's crazy. Why would I ever do that? It's the reality of hackathons. I think you can boil it down to the fact that the goal of hackathons is not to create anything super robust. No one can ever do that in 24 hours. The idea, again, coming back to it, is executing on ideas minimally so that you can show that the idea is feasible and meaningful and cool, and that's going to be about it. You can definitely take this project after the hackathon and then improve it, but that'll take a lot of time, and you don't have that time during a hackathon. So yeah, that is my answer to this question. And then finally, there's this last thing about, tips for the demo video, which is your submission to the App Inventor community has to require a video where you basically present the idea. So there are a few ingredients to a really good demo video. I think the first one is, again, like Kat said, evidence of buy-in or an argument to why people would buy into this. You need to present the problem. If you're presenting this problem of issues with the quality of education, don't just say we're going to attack quality education. Tell a story, because a story is worth 1,000 words. Like, tell the story of whatever problem you're trying to solve. People wanting to take CS classes but not being able to take it, or sustainable cities and communities. Tell the story of you being constantly frustrated by the fact that public transportation is terrible, and that you're always stuck in traffic, and maybe you built an app to solve this, to route people, to change the way that people route GPSs so that carbon emissions are saved. That's a pretty hard problem, but just imagine. Or like sustainably managing forests, combating desertification. You might tell the story of endangered species, especially endangered flora. You can take satellite imagery and use AI to analyze them and figure out how, which areas are more in danger of drought so that these endangered species die, or what areas are at higher risk of wildfires. But you need to tell the story. So you need to start out by like explaining the problem and really kind of, convincing the judges that this is an important problem and showing them how bad it is. And then you can transition to showing what your solution does. So that's a first good tip for the demo video. You want your judges to become emotionally invested. And then you need to very, very clearly explain what your thing does and how it does it. And in this section, you want to use as many visuals as possible. So remember when I mentioned that when you're developing your application, you need to start thinking about the presentation immediately. This is what I'm talking about. So you need to kind of screen record your app working, or like film yourself using the app, and you demo what the app does. There is a problem with wildfires. Therefore, my app takes in drone footage and it spits out a prediction on where the badness is. And you show it working, like you show it scanning a bunch of drone footage, you click the button and it does the magic, and then it spits out boxes. It like locates all the spots where it thinks that wildfires are in great danger of happening. And then you argue in this video, you say to the judges, like, this is going to be important because X, Y, and Z. And you can do early detection, you can do targeted prevention, you can do targeted threat alleviation in cases where the fire has already started. So a lot of these kinds of things, you just tell the judges like, hey, problem, get them emotionally invested, here's my solution, and that's it. A great demo video is furthermore very concise. You don't want to be wasting time telling judges things that they'll be bored to listen to. And you need to be excited about your app. You can't just give it like a deadpan tone, because if you're not excited, no one else will be. So those are just a few tips for the demo video. So let me check up on Kat. I don't know if she's still here. Yeah, I don't know. Her Wi-Fi just completely died. But I just wanted to stop here and see if people have any questions. Because this is sort of the portion where I've covered most of the things that I wanted to cover. I've covered most of the frequently asked questions about hackathons. And I'm totally open to talking about anything. Like, if you want me to talk about your idea and maybe refine it or give you comments, I'm happy to do that. Or if you have any other general questions. Cool. So I'm already starting to see some things come in the chat. So Tom attended and won the MIT Appathon in 7th grade. Congratulations. Besides coding, what science and math background are important to accumulate besides what school teaches you? It really depends on what you're interested in, right? Whatever you're interested in, you should just figure out how to learn it properly. So what are you interested in? I feel like that would be helpful for me to know if I were to give you any advice. Yeah, so Kat is coming back. Her Wi-Fi is in the process of being fixed. Okay, so can you give one application example? I kind of just did that when I was talking about the demo video. I think this would be cool. You create an application that looks at satellite imagery and points out places where, or it just takes in a bunch of data. Maybe it like looks at the weather or something, takes in a bunch of data and it tries to figure out where, if there are regions that are very susceptible to wildfires. That's a huge problem where I am. I'm in California right now. They have, I think wildfire season is going to start soon, or maybe we're already in it. I don't even know. Um, that I think the wildfire thing would be a really cool idea. And I think that would have a really good shot at winning because not many people know how to do AI with this kind of stuff. Khan Academy, but with add-on features. Any criticism? Oh, Kat's back. What's up? So just for context, Kat, I finished talking through the facts, but we're going through this chat and seeing if people have questions. So I'm currently talking to Ivan about Khan Academy, but with add-on features. I think this is a cool idea, but it's a little bit too broad. So if you want to unmute yourself, let's have a discussion. What do you want to add on to Khan Academy? Cool. I think when it comes to things like education, you need to be more specific with what you're trying to attack. Like, for example, maybe your claim is that the apps that teach people how to code are really bad, and you want to create an app that teaches people how to code. I think Khan Academy, but with add-on features is too broad because Khan Academy is too broad. But I like this gamification idea. I think that's super cool and it could be worth looking into. But you'll want to focus on a specific area. Like, are you going to teach people how to do math or do bio or chem or those kinds of things? So you want to focus on a math and code. Okay. And so yeah, I mean, I think that's cool. I think STEM is even still too broad because the way that you learn different STEM concepts is very different. Like the way that you learn biology is totally different from how you learn physics. So yeah, it's you want to narrow the scope down a bit, but nevertheless, I think it's cool. Yeah, Nathan asks a really good question. Can I recommend a few sites for APIs that can help you do things? So let me mention a few things. Number one is if you know how to use Python, which I think some people in the audience know how to use Python and are somewhat familiar with, like with using Python packages for machine learning. There is a repository that I will post in the chat, which consists of a very simple starter script that helps you run AI models in the cloud. And if you can do that, you can build your own API and you can train your own model to process medical related APIs, to process medical data. And then your API will be the thing that you query using App Inventor. So that's going to be very impressive to the judges, especially with Appathon, where most people don't know how to use Python. Yeah, but not to worry if you don't know how to use Python. Let me see. I don't know of any like medical related APIs that are publicly available because usually people put these behind paywalls. So I mean, let's just Google it. Skin cancer classification API. Yeah, so most of these websites are going to give you code that you can run, but it won't be an API. So you need to kind of set it up yourself. And so if you're not familiar with Python, that'll be hard. If there are so there are some APIs that are more accessible. One that I like to work with is Deep AI Text Generator. So Deep AI has some nice APIs that, you know, this guy maintains. So I can send this in the chat. But basically, if you ever want to like find an API for something, just Google whatever you want to find and put API at the end of the Google query and then see what comes up. But then the other option is if you know Python, you can build your own. And let me send you guys actually this this repository that I'm talking about in case you do know Python. Let me, let's find YOLO server. Whoops. Yeah, so this is the server that can help you run things and interface with MIT App Inventor. Cool. Yeah, Kat, are there any other interesting questions that you see? Let me scroll up.
Let me take a look through the list now that my Wi-Fi is back on.
Yes, welcome back.
Thank you.
So I see a question about does the submission need to be fully functional? Do they ask you to submit your code? Okay, so they ask you to submit your code. So then if they ask you to submit your code, then you definitely need to make sure that it works. It's possible that they'll try it. You don't have to make it completely bug-less, but just try to simplify complexity as much as you can. You don't have to like make the UI super pleasant or make sure that it syncs with the cloud or make sure that a bunch of edge cases are taken care of. Just make sure that it works in a basic manner and that if they run it, it won't like completely die. Because it's possible that, you know, especially for the winning submissions, they will want to check your code to make sure that it works. You don't want to risk submitting something that's broken and having them reject you for that reason. So yeah. For video submissions, do we need to make 2 separate videos for the presentation and code demo? Is anyone else more familiar with the format of submission than I am? So it's just one submission. Yeah, I think that you can put the code demo in the same one as the presentation because they naturally flow together. The presentation is about what the problem is and how you solve it. And then the code demo is like literally a visual representation of how you solved it. So they should go in the same video. So I have this DM about how should version control be done on App Inventor. So for the person who asked this message, who sent this, do you mean version control in terms of like Git? Version control in the sense of when multiple people collaborate, what happens when changes are overridden and stuff? Or what does version control mean? Okay, cool. Yeah, so there is no version control in App Inventor, unfortunately. So you have to download the app you have to download the app intermittently. Otherwise, you know, if you lose your progress or you do something dumb and you can't undo it, then you're out of luck. So yeah, this is actually a really good question. Make sure to download your app intermittently and to back it up so you don't risk losing changes. And then if you want to collaborate, this is actually really hard. MIT App Inventor is not really good at collaboration. So you kind of have to work on things in series. You can't do them in parallel. Otherwise, your changes will overwrite someone else's changes, and then it won't be a fun time. No, you don't work on different projects at the same time. You work on the same project, but just at different times. You can't both be writing code at the same time because this App Inventor will break, I think. So there's also a question, considering the timeline you have, will working on an application or an extension of a public package be a good idea? So could you please clarify what a public package you're thinking of is? Because if I recall correctly, the packages or the extensions are written in Java, and it's, I think, a pain. It's a pain in the neck to get that set up and make it work. So yeah, I will wait for your clarification.
Yeah,
There's
Kevin.
also,
So
Yes.
basically, I mean, like any public package could be the natural language processing package, or just the one you have like the cancer identification package. So my thing is like some package algorithm already published, we do some small extension. Could that be a good idea?
Yeah, you can definitely use things that have already been published. For example, the MIT App Inventor thing, they have the whole AI course, right? So if you ever want to use the image classifier that they embedded in one of the lessons, feel free to. And you can take, yeah, the extension I think that's actually a great idea. You should definitely take advantage of as many existing resources as possible. So yeah. And you can even frame it as a new application. Like the thing that you downloaded is the image classifier, but what you're building is not an image classifier. It's, for example, something to detect wildfires or stuff like that. So you can frame it in a way that makes it sound like it's a new application, even though you're extending things. So I have a bunch of questions about how to use Python to make an API. Well, if you're familiar with Python, there's this package called Flask. If you click into this, you can actually see that there's this thing called Flask, and Flask manages this API for you. Basically, you can set up a URL where if you go to that URL and you type in some information, it'll go to the AI model and it'll ask for all the data, and then it can send it back. I don't know if this was taught during the MIT App Inventor classes. I don't know if Dr. Meng is teaching a new class that would cover this, but currently you would just have to you can just look at the code. The code is very simple. But if you don't know Python or you're unfamiliar with these things, then I think a class that teaches this would be the best way to learn about it. Or you can just Google Python API with Flask. You can just Google it and there's probably a tutorial. Yeah, towards data science. Your very reliable intro newbie website. Yeah. So if you know Python, you can take a look at this website. Yeah, but I think it is true that APIs are very exciting. And if you use one, if you use one that you create yourself, the judges will be extremely impressed probably. So that's a good way to stand out. That is a secret. But yeah, any other questions? Yeah, so Amy asks a really good question. How do you link Python to the MIT App Inventor? So the way that we do it is using networking. Whenever you go to a website, for example, oh, whoops, what did I just do? When you go to any website, like weather.com or anything, you're basically just talking to a computer, and this computer happens to be serving all this data to you, and it's sending it back. So instead of using a website or going to an HTML website, you set up a Python script so that it broadcasts some information over some endpoint, where if you go to that URL, you go to that link, then the Python script will send you information back. So an example of this is if on MIT App Inventor, you take a picture with your phone, you can send this picture over the internet to that URL, and the Python script will read it in, and then it'll do the AI processing, and then the Python script will send it back to your phone over the internet. It's a standard protocol, TCP, so it's very general. You can send anything pretty much. And that's how they can communicate with each other. But yeah, these are awesome questions. Feel free to shoot me more because we have about 10 minutes left and I don't have much else to say. And so most of my time will just be for you guys. If you have any questions about your idea, if you want new ideas, hit me up. I'll probably just give you a bunch of them. Oh, cool. Okay, another question. Is making a website and showing it with the web viewer component a good idea? It really depends. I think obviously this kind of goes against the spirit of the Appathon, which is like to create something in App Inventor. And you're really putting yourself as, it kind of depends on what you want to make. If you wouldn't mind, please, let me know what you want to make in the chat. But you would be putting yourself at a somewhat of a disadvantage, because if you just make a website, you can't take advantage of the cool features that MIT has built in, like the GPS, navigation, sensors, Cloud DB, all of this stuff. It's just much more complicated to do when you make a website. So if you wouldn't mind, I'd like to know what you're trying to build that you want to put in a website instead of building the UI on a phone, and maybe we can talk through whether this is a good idea or not. Yeah, I mean, MIT App Inventor isn't going to give you the most beautiful components. So it's something you should just, I think, accept, because no, custom CSS is not possible. I think the prettiness of your application is not going to matter at all. If you look at the past Appathon winners, most of them have pretty ugly user interfaces just because App Inventor is not a pretty front end. What you will be losing out on if you make a website is you can't use any of the custom stuff. All the amazing stuff that MIT App Inventor has baked in, you can't use. So yeah, hopefully that answers your question. I would encourage you to just work natively in App Inventor, but if you really wanted to, you could just create a website and put it on an app. So Amy again asks, are we allowed to use extensions for our apps? Absolutely. You can use whatever you want that exists in the real world. You can use external APIs. You can use the AI extensions that MIT App Inventor created. You can use whatever the heck you want. It's really up to your imagination. And honestly, the more that you use, the more pre-built stuff that you use, the more impressive your application will be and the more capability it will have. So feel free to go for it. If we use Flask to build our API, where do we get data or content for the API? So usually if you're hosting your own API, your goal is to host a custom AI model. And so you would have to train your own AI model on some data set, and then you would serve the model. So whenever a request comes in, you would call your model with the input and then return its outputs to the user. And so again, this repository has a model for this, or has like it demonstrates how to do this. The part that my repository doesn't demonstrate is actually how do you train your model. You should just Google a tutorial on training AI models if you're familiar with that. But once you've trained your model on some custom data, you can serve it using this very simple pattern, which is like when you go to this endpoint of predict, then I'll call this function predict and draw, and then I'll just return the result of that function. And this prediction function is literally just taking my AI model and running the input through it. You can see like this predict function is just from the AI model. And once you pass the image into the AI model, it gives you a result. So it's pretty simple and it's actually really powerful. So again, if you're familiar with Flask, it's cool and you should use it. But if you don't know Flask, don't be worried or anything, because MIT App Inventor's components are very cool and powerful, but just know that it's an easy differentiator if you write your own API. Cool. These are awesome questions. Any more? We have about like 5 or 6 minutes left. So what are people trying to, oh, whoops, there's more questions. Is it possible to use data to train an AI model within 2 weeks? Oh yeah, it's definitely going to be doable. Don't use a model that's too big, or don't use data that's too big. Just use a smaller data set, smaller model. The tutorials that you'll see on, like, for example, Towards Data Science, those tutorials will be pretty small. Like if I just Google skin cancer classification ML tutorial, there's this like Medium article, or there's this educational initiative thing, whatever. All of this stuff that they're doing is totally doable on just a regular computer. So I'll send this link. This is an idea that someone might want to do. So yeah, you just train your model, and then you can serve it using the code that I sent in the onto GitHub. Any other questions? Oh, what school do I go to? I currently go to MIT. Yeah, but I'm curious to hear what people are trying to build. So if you want to, you can go ahead and throw your idea in the chat. If you don't have an idea, it doesn't even matter. Just throw any ideas you have in the chat and we'll go through them. Because I think things like Appathons are pretty gameable. If you have a good idea, you have a pretty good shot at winning. What would be the accuracy for training an AI model? You want it to be as high as possible. And usually these tutorials will tell you what you should expect. Yeah, this one says you should expect it to be about 84%. So yeah, you should just read the tutorials and see what they say. Where can you get good data sets? Google, just Google data sets. Like if you wanted to look at, again, skin cancer, you just type skin cancer AI data set. Or if you wanted to look at data sets for wildfire machine learning data set, forest fires data set right here, forest fires data set right here, everywhere, data sets in so many places. Google's a beautiful thing. Okay, awesome. Bruce submitted an idea, something that can calculate the amount of gas saved by travel options, different travel options. Yeah, I think that's really cool. So I mean, I guess there are a few ways we can take this, right? Showing people how much gas they could save by walking instead of driving, or biking instead of driving, like all types of transportation plans. I mean, I'm trying to think of different things you can extend this with. Maybe if you wanted to, if you wanted to hit some destinations, like for example, you start at your home and you want to go to, locations A, B, and C, it'll route you to A, B, and C, and it'll tell you what mode of transportation you should use, etc., to save energy or something. So how would you get this info? There are APIs for this. I think if you use the Google Maps API, they have a bunch of stuff that you can use. And so if you notice, if you go into Google Maps, if you want to go anywhere, like say I wanted to go to Chinatown, San Francisco, and I asked for directions, it would tell me like a bike ride is 18 minutes, walking would be 51 minutes, driving would be 17, transit would be this. And I guess your idea would be to try to minimize emissions or something. So, you could give them recommendations directly instead of having people click through everything. So yeah, I think this is a good idea. Some things you might want to consider is how do you make people, or how do you incentivize people to actually care about this? Because cars are just so much more convenient, especially in San Francisco. So yeah, I mean, there are probably some smart things that you could do. Like, for example, you not only plan their route, but you also plan when they should leave, or stuff like that. But I think it would basically just boil down to a wrapper, a thin layer on top of Google Maps' API where you, I guess, aggregate information slightly differently. But I think it'd be useful if you present it the right way. It's sort of like this tool that can help people who are environmentally conscious make better decisions. And it would be cool if you could add a counter or a meter of how much carbon emissions you saved. I don't know, Kat, do you have any thoughts on this idea or places where you think we could take it?
In terms of like just getting information, I'm not as pointed to like collecting data and looking at numbers, but I like to look at visual representations or like, I thought of like documentaries at first. Perhaps this is like an unpopular idea, but it kind of takes you through like the background and experiences people are trying to reach. Because you mentioned earlier that you want to convince people that, you know, a good app to use and it's going to benefit them. But yeah, it just wraps things around with like context and everything. And that's something that numbers and like data sets don't necessarily explain all that much.
Yeah. Okay, so I agree with this. I think one of the big challenges that you'll have to face when building this is, again, start thinking about your presentation. How would you convince people that this is like cool and different and useful? And let's see. Yeah, I think if you frame it in a way where it's like this system or this app, maybe you can even propose social features, but it's this app where you can gain points every time you save carbon emissions, and it can tell you exactly how to save carbon emissions. You can say that Google makes it very confusing because you have to click through all these options and it's not super clear how much carbon emissions you're actually creating or stuff like that. But you instead aggregate all this information in a different way, but the difference is important because you make it super obvious how much I'm saving, how much longer it's going to take, and then you can weigh whether the savings are going to be worth it for the amount of time that you're going to have to spend or stuff like that.
Also, I'll add one more thing because you mentioned like using Google as like a platform to talk about some of the gaps in using that platform. I think even referring to some other popular apps that people commonly use, but you know, if you see like a weakness somewhere and you can address your app and like, oh, here's how we can address this missing point, such as like if we're talking about travels and maps, there's like Google Maps or there's Waze. Waze is super popular, but talking about distance and saving energy, how does the distance versus time differ? Like which one is more like economic and environmentally friendly? And I think like defining what counts as like environmentally friendly and what counts as saving is important. Sometimes like the words just need a little bit more of a sentence to it.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think this could actually be pretty exciting if sort of the ideas come together properly. Basically, this is a tool that actually makes it clear how much impact you're having on the environment. And it's this sort of like automated assistant that can help you make better decisions, that optimizes, kind of is on the frontier of saving you time and also saving the environment. So if you frame it like that, I feel like people would bite. And I think it'd be pretty cool. So yeah, it's hopefully that was helpful. I don't know if you have any follow-up questions. I know we're getting kind of late, so I want to do a last call for any last questions. But yeah, does anyone else have any final thoughts or any things that they want answered? Okay, one last question. So is there a specific module for linking MIT App Inventor with outside Python scripts? Unfortunately, no, but yes, actually, yes. The answer is yes. It's just the web thing. I think it's called internet or the connectivity. It's the one where you can send API requests. As I kind of briefly talked about earlier, the way that MIT App Inventor and Python will communicate is over the internet. And so use Python to serve an API where your application can then call it. And so, yeah, should be pretty straightforward. Oh, it's called web. Okay, cool. So yeah, I think that's all we have time for today. I want to give a huge shout out to Kat for doing a great job kind of leading the discussion and fighting through the internet difficulties. And if you have any questions, just feel free to ask Dr. Meng, and I'm sure that he will have good answers to them or he can relay them to me. But hopefully this was helpful. Good luck on the Appathon. I really, really look forward to the stuff that you guys create. I think it's going to be super exciting. And I know for certain that there are going to be people sitting in this room that will win a big award. So let's make sure that that is you. Best of luck.
Thank you.